Welcome back to another episode of My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm iconic. Allow me to introduce Colleen Simon, the incredible head of social work in a local authority. Colleen is a dedicated professional who plays a crucial role in ensuring the safety and well-being of adults in need of safeguarding. With her expertise and leadership, she works tirelessly to promote awareness, provide support, and implement effective strategies for adult safeguarding. Colleen's commitment to her work is truly inspiring. So get ready to embark on a journey through the world of adult safeguarding and mental health capacity. We're unpacking the complexities, celebrating the successes, and working towards a more compassionate and inclusive society for all. Can you tell us what your role is and what impact you have made in the area of mental health when it comes to vulnerable adults?
Sure, yeah. So I am a social worker, qualified for coming up to 21 years now.
Wow. You look
Yeah.
so young.
Oh, thank you. Well, got a bit of snow growing up here, but yeah. So I I completed my degree and my last placement during my social work degree was working with drug and alcohol users. And I just really loved that area of work. People using alcohol chronically or drugs and having the opportunity to support people changing their lives just really moved me. So when I started my career, I decided that's what I wanted to do. Um, for me, uh, substance use, alcohol use, addiction, whatever you want to call it, is hand in hand with mental health. So as I started to work in that area, I began to see there was a real connection between people's traumatic experiences, not always, but environments in which they grew up in, attachment styles, experiences of schooling, racism, power imbalances, certain work, people, certain jobs people did would expose them to more alcohol, for example, working as a chef or in um, hospitality. So yeah, I just really enjoyed that work. I then went more into mental health. So I trained as an approved mental health professional. So as a social worker, you can do this training and it allows you to actually go out and detain people under the Mental Health Act. So it's an extra course you do and it
Mm.
sort of takes your skills much further. So you kind of go and you kind of assess people and you're really looking at that legal framework. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I do. I train. So part of my role, so my current role, I work for the NHS. I'm head of social work, social care, adult safeguarding, and mental capacity act. So it's a huge portfolio, which entails a lot. It entails a lot. I don't so much do frontline work anymore. Part of my role is teaching at Brunel, and a consultancy with Brunel. I also teach AMPs, so the approved mental health professionals. I teach social workers to become those professionals that can go out and do that work. I also do training as part of my job. In the NHS, we have a lot of specialist social work roles. So palliative care, mental health social workers, perinatal social workers in prisons, older adults, children's services. We've got a whole host of specialist social workers. So I'm the head of that profession in my trust. And part of that role is developing the profession and making sure that the role of social work's understood within the sort of medical model of delivering care and ensuring that the social perspectives kind of get considered. Social care, so that interface between health and social care, making sure that the systems are talking to each other, that we're working in partnership. Adult safeguarding, obviously making sure that we're following the correct processes, that we're safeguarding vulnerable adults, if there are any untoward incidences and that things need to change, those things are put in place, and we're making sure the learning is being distributed within the organisation. And Mental Capacity Act is again around that legal literacy, making sure that staff are aware of issues around mental capacity and how to address them on the front line. So it's a huge role. I feel like I've been talking for about 10 minutes, but that in a nutshell is a bit about me and my social work career and what I do.
That's amazing. I feel like often in adult social care, it's often perceived, people often perceive it as the local authority, but
Yeah.
you work within the NHS, don't you?
Yeah.
Like this is even something that I learned like very recently as well. From my adult psychiatrist is like there's a social services within the NHS. I knew that about psychiatric wards, but I didn't know like outpatient services have those services as well. So how do you navigate, for example, like looked after children or care experienced young people like myself? How do you navigate your role, like, as social services within the NHS and then with the local authorities NHS in from whatever borough they're from?
So, I mean, really, it's about partnership working. It really is. They're hand in glove. You can't work with someone's physical health without working on their social care, their social needs, things like housing, things like access to, benefits, vocation. You can't do one without the other. So in regards to like looked after children, we employ looked after children nurses who do the physical health checks. We have CAM services, so child adolescent mental health services that will work with children or care leavers. All of those separate services that we are designed to work with adult social care. So local authorities, children and family social workers, care leaver social workers, any service that we have, we'd be working in partnership with other professionals. So it's a multidisciplinary, holistic approach to people's care. That's how it should be. And when it works really well, people are getting wraparound services that they need when, they may be in a crisis or having a really tough time.
Mm. And do you find you seem like you experience in both campsite and adults. Do you find that there is difficulties in providing that holistic approach when do you find that there's a lack of communication um in adults compared to children where everything is like, they're minors, they're seen as, more vulnerable and they're and everything is legal because they're under 18, so everything needs to be ticked off. You know, does that make sense? I feel like I'm not.
No, 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 it makes total sense. So what I can tell you is that with children, like you've alluded to, you've got this legal framework where if someone's a looked after child, for example, there are certain things, there are checks and balances that need to be done. However, what we're noticing now is once young people leave that service, it's almost like they fall off a cliff. They've had all of this wraparound service, they've had all the, the checks, they've had maybe one or two social workers, they may have had a guardian, once they hit 18, suddenly they're an
Bye.
adult. Yeah, it's like, see ya. So they're an adult now. It's like, right, you make your own decisions now. You go off and you do it. And what we're saying, what the government are saying is that they sort of want a little bit more for vulnerable adults. But we've also recognized that there's this transitional gap. So from 18 to 24, some
Yeah.
people are sort of bolstering services for that kind of transition where someone's not quite an adult. You might have someone who's 18 on paper, but in their mind they're actually 15, or
Mm.
even younger. Or,
Yeah.
trauma has meant that they really struggle with building relationships, maintaining relationships, paying bills, being independent, and so on and so forth. So you've got children, you've got a very strong framework. And it's not to say that children and young people don't fall between the gaps, because we know, when there's reviews, when a child or young person dies, the thing that's always coming up is communication. The social worker didn't speak to the doctor, or the doctor didn't speak to the social worker, or the young person might have said they were in their friend's house and they were really, they took a train to Bristol or whatever, so there's always room for improvement. Communication is key. But that's kind of the way things are. You've got the children's structures and legal frameworks. After that, you've kind of got a transitional safeguarding gap where we're trying to sort of recognize the vulnerabilities of people that are still young, not children, not quite adults. And then you've got the adults. Again, similar issues arise in terms of communication, but people are seen as adults. So they're seen as having more autonomy and more power, which sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Like the thing is, like we like to also keep this like personalized as well. So there'll be like points where I will share my own experiences as well.
Yeah.
So um um one thing that I did notice, oh my God, my mind just went blank. What were we talking about? Oh, the one thing that I did notice is um it's it's like I'm probably one of the few people who have a high level of support, but is way lower than how it was as a child. But I'm one of there's three people with me at all times. I don't have dolls, but it stopped when I turned 18 automatically. But I'm still under dolls conditions, and there's three people with me all the times. Everything is monitored. There's things I can do by myself. People get worried and stuff like that. I feel like unless you've like as a child, you continuously seemed to cause alarms in social services or cans or something like that, you won't get even like therapy or the basic support,
Mhm.
which I've noticed is like my like I've met people in the psychiatric ward and stuff like that, but because either they don't have certain factors like they're not in care, so they don't have as much attention and limelight like we do, or they are in care, but their social workers do not turn up to these meetings. And when a social worker's there, it's like a social worker out of everybody in the room in that meeting, they're pretty much the most powerful people there. And it's like without somebody with that authority watching over every little thing that you say in that meeting, every action that you do, I feel like people do not see or see the need for a comprehensive um method to go through the meeting. It's okay, let's get this done. We have to go to whatever we need to do next. But I feel like a lot of people fall through the gaps because people value authority too much and not, I feel like depending on some people, it's like if you go higher, but some people it's like even if you do a job for a long time, they forget why they came in and they forget to be empathetic. It's like, you know what, this is this is what we need to do, this is what we're doing, get that done, and let's move on. But there's so much more that's required.
Mm.
You know, therapy's great, da, 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 all these things are great. But you know what, like some things, like a young person, knowing that there's an adult right there that is it does actually genuinely does give a fuck.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Like
Mm.
that feeling, you know you're able to contact them whenever. Even if they take, I don't know, they're on annual leave for 2 weeks, you know that they will come back and they will fight for you.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people without that one adult, there's nothing.
Mm.
Have you like experienced that, like, you know, professionally, like seeing things like that happen?
Oh,
And
for sure, 100%. I mean, a social worker is a multifaceted role, and people don't get it. So what you're describing there ultimately is having a social worker that's an advocate, that will speak up on your behalf, that will be in your corner, that will be your cheerleader, that will believe in you, that will believe that you have the power and the strength and the courage to change the things that you can. Um, and you are right. Unfortunately, some people do get burnt out in the role and, you know, lose empathy or passion. But I very much see social work still as at the core of my being. Like, it's about human connection, it's about trust, it's about talking the talk, showing up authentically.
yeah, very much
So,
so.
and social work does get a hard time. We get a hard time in the media, particularly when things go wrong. Um, but we are seeing, like, I'm seeing a few more social workers kind of get recognized for the good work that they're doing. Because it's something that kind of never stops,
Mm,
you know. You become, as a social worker, I've had the privilege to have been part of people's lives for a short time. And, you know, these are people are letting me into their world. They're inviting me into their homes, they're talking to me about their problems. And I've never underestimated the power of that.
mm,
And it has been hard to say goodbye, but you have to manage expectations. I'm coming into someone's life when they're at potentially a low point in their life. I want to get them to a high point, and at that point, that's the point where they don't need me anymore.
mm.
So it's tricky. It's really tricky.
And I like 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 thinking from, you know, your perspective, a professional perspective, is also a time when you know somebody's leaving, the risk often escalates, and then you're like, am I making the right decision of leaving this person? Because
Mm.
it's like, okay, is this because I'm leaving, or is this because of something else? And you must get really, really worried.
Yeah, totally, totally. Look, I mean, I've worked with I've worked with loads of different people, and I remember I worked with someone, and they would call me every Friday at 10 to or 5 to 5. And it was like an anxiety call, because she wouldn't call me the rest of the week. But just before the weekend, it's like she had to hear my voice, because there were 2 days I would be unreachable. And you see people grow and develop. social work for me is about nurturing people. You know, we're nurturing people to see things in a different way, navigate difficult systems, whether it be benefits, housing, you know, legal status, for example, being on on a deprivation of liberty, safeguarding, authorization, whatever it is, you're nurturing people. So it is difficult. It is really difficult to strike a balance, because sometimes you have to deliver news that, you know, is difficult. You know, we don't want to let people down. We don't want to upset people. But at the same time, we have to be honest. We have to be real. You know, and part of life is saying goodbyes. I felt really guilty, you know, leaving a job and thinking, oh my gosh, I feel really bad. I feel like I'm abandoning someone.
Mm.
And in a way, you know, you see, sometimes I've seen patterns play out with people that I've worked with, where, you know, they've been quite needy, and then you give them what they've asked for and then they don't want it, and you kind of get into this rescuer mode and you build a dependence, and sometimes that's not healthy either. So it's a really difficult dilemma, you know, ending, saying goodbye, trying to leave people in the best place possible as well, you know, particularly if they aren't going to get a new social worker, or even if they are, you know, um preparing them so it's a healthy ending.
Mm. We're going to move to the Mental Capacity Act. So I feel like, you know, this is one of the main things that, you know, it seems like you focus on. And I feel like other people may relate to this. Even professionals who work with people who are either on adults or not on adults, but in adults-like conditions, they don't even understand the concept of a mental health capacity or best interest, or the fact that best interest only applies if you do not have capacity.
Yeah.
So, can you explain the key purpose of the uh, Mental Capacity Act and how it safeguards the rights of individuals?
Yeah, for sure. So the Mental Capacity Act, it stemmed from a case, HR versus Bournemouth, and the case essentially was about someone who lacked capacity to make decisions, but was in hospital, and because they weren't under a legal framework, as in the Mental Health Act, they were sort of in no man's land. So they were in a hospital, voluntarily, but they lacked capacity. So they had no legal framework, no grounds to appeal, because they lack capacity. So this went through several courts, and it was decided that there needed to be something that filled this gap, and it's called the Bournemouth gap. And so what the Mental Capacity Act does is it recognises that, based on someone having a certain condition, it could be a learning disability, it could be some sort of dementia or mental health issue, based on the person having a condition, that as a result of having that condition, that they could lack capacity to make specific decisions at specific times. So it's very decision specific. And it's generally, within the legal framework in the UK, it's generally about physical health treatment or where they live, so their accommodation. So they're big decisions, aren't they? They're big decisions that people often have to make. And sometimes people need a professional to act on their behalf. but we need to make sure certain checks and balances are in place. So, for example, if someone had a car accident, for example, and could no longer live their life in a normal way, so may have got a head injury, potentially needed treatment. If the head injury meant that they no longer had capacity to make those decisions, then someone has to make those decisions. So it could be a parent, a spouse, a child, or it could be, you know, someone within social services that would be acting on their behalf. All decisions made should be in that person's best interests. And I'm qualified as a best interest assessor. So you would go through a checklist. One of the first things you would think about is, if the person did have capacity, what might they want to decide? And is that a possibility? Is it possible, you know, does it exist? Does that option exist for that person? You would also take into consideration the person that they are. So, you know, male, female, heterosexual, race, religion, you'd consider all those factors. And, you know, then you'd weigh up the pros and cons. That is the process. So it is complicated. And I think the reason why people don't get it is that as a piece of legislation, it's still a little bit clunky. People are still scared of it. People will make a blanket rule about that person lacks capacity. Well, no, because you might lack capacity around a specific decision, but you can still make decisions about what you decide to wear, how you have your hair, you know, what you choose to eat. There are still decisions we make all of the time, but there are certain decisions that are more complex. For example, how we spend our money. You know, they're big, complex decisions. Where we live, what we do, you know, whether we have treatment, you know, whether we go to the dentist or not. You know, so it's thinking about the repercussions of some of those decisions, and some people will need help with those. So does that make sense? Have I answered your question? It's quite long-winded, isn't it? It's complicated.
Yeah, you answered the question perfectly. How do you think that mental capacity promotes autonomy and self-determination for individuals?
I mean, I think it really does depend
Person
on,
to person.
yeah, I mean, there's part of me that feels like it completely strips it away. But then there's another part of me that thinks, well, before we had this legislation, you had a lot of older people that were in old people's homes, care
Mm.
homes, for example. Um, Now we have a framework whereby that can't just happen if someone's got no relatives. There's a system of protection. But it's how it's used. It could be used in a very positive way, or it could be used in a very oppressive way.
Hmm.
So it's open to objectivity. Can you see where I'm coming from? You
Yeah,
know, it's how
I
you
feel like,
use it.
yeah, definitely. I feel like I've been through like two different providers whilst, no, I'm lying, three different providers whilst having dolls. The first one was absolutely horrendous. I used my dolls all the time, even though it was a like as and when needed.
Ad hoc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the second provider yeah, my second provider was amazing. At the
Mm.
beginning, they did struggle because it was like a very difficult concept for them to understand because there's so many restrictions that you can use.
Yeah.
But it's when you use them, is this risk me being angry,
Mm.
or is this risk me just being passionate and very articulate? Where when she's passionate and articulate because of her autism, she can't speak in a very like a lower tone, is
Yeah,
often very shouty. But Royce me, I don't perceive it as shouting because I'm just saying the words that I'm hearing, seeing in my head, and because it's hard to string all these words together, there's something else that has to compromise for
yeah,
me using my brain all the time in that moment. So the voice might go higher. I mean louder, sorry. And people and then for them to try and navigate when it's needed. And when I perceive my dolls as unnecessary, they might perceive it as necessary. But I feel like the dolls can often add an element of risk as well. Is when if it's I had it, but because like it's it's when I don't a lot of people that I met, they're very similar in the way that they think. It's if you think, even if you're not going to do something, but somebody thinks that you're going to do something, let me do it. You think I'm gonna fuck up, I'm gonna show you that I'm gonna fuck up. So if you're gonna use restrictions, I'll give you a reason to use it. Because it's like without a reason, it feels very much you're stripping away my liberties, and I want it. And for me, I was at an ETOS, so a tutor had to come and see me. I had no interactions with people my own age. Very rarely did I have interaction with people my own age, and or similar age. And then because you're stuck in that very deprived environment, you don't know nothing else.
mm,
And it's like, okay, there's nobody sort of similar age that's living with me. There's nothing. I'm surrounded by adults all the time, and I'm interacting with the adults, which is not helpful. Like interacting with people, it's not helpful. And there's also a thing with authority. People with trauma, not always, but quite often, they have an issue with authority.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be, voice me and the police. It can be voice me and the carer.
yeah,
I'm used to looking after myself, so I will continue doing that, and you continue doing whatever you're doing. But I'm more than capable of looking after myself. So when you have that authority and then you have a bit of dolls, you're like, I feel like the urges to abscond or like break away is so high. And I don't know which I think is I think is Belgium. I don't know, but I think it's a country starting with B. I don't know what country. I can find it out later. But it's if somebody escapes from prison or tries to escape from prison, they will not be charged with additional crime because it's a natural human urge to run away. Like, take control and get back to a place where you know. The only thing is, if you take away the prison uniform, they usually you have to send it back because that is a crime because it's stealing from a thing. Loopholes. But like still, yeah. But I feel like at the same time, I feel like because of those liberties, I feel like there's so many times that I could have killed myself where I'm like, I wouldn't be doing, I don't know, this podcast, for example, if those liberties weren't in place. So I guess, and then I feel like my situation, a lot of people who do have mental health difficulties or neurodiversity or neurodivergent, they have a strong sense of justice. And they will go and they can, it allows you to go down that path, exploring careers, explore opportunities, and find out who you really are. But I guess who you are can also be stripped away. You're nothing but these dolls. You're nothing but this person who, like for me, if somebody asked me to describe myself, I can't think of any words than high risk. I'm high risk. I'm like, when I'm distressed, I'm really emotional. People see me as very emotional. even like I really emotional. Sometimes I can get aggressive when I'm really, really distressed. If I feel unsafe, I'm gonna do anything to protect myself because it worked before. Just because you take me out of that environment, I'm not gonna just automatically learn that this is going to be safe. But it's I feel like one thing the courts do most of the time. I feel like the courts are very good at like when you either have a guardian as well, or like the guardian, your solicitor, and the judge. They're very much making sure that people understand that you use the least restrictive option as possible. I feel like people want to go from 1 to 10. Let's try 2, and then we'll reevaluate. We can jump from 3 to 4, or we can go from 2 to 4, but we're not going all the way to 10 unless there's a need to. There's an actual risk of death right there and then. Some call it the last choice, some people call it the first choice. But I'm like, it's the last resort. I feel like I talked for way too long. Um, what factors are considered when assessing someone's capacity to make decisions under the Act?
So, like I said before, and having listened to you as well, I think there's huge importance on, intersectionality, having age appropriate people around, having access to, activities that are culturally appropriate. And it does annoy me sometimes when we talk about risk, because I think risk needs to be assessed in context. When I was working as a best interest assessor, and I'd go to visit, you know, people in hospital, or older people with dementia, and it would say, well, they're a risk of walking into the road. And I'm like, but they've never been knocked down by a car before. I'm at risk of, do you know what I mean? Walking into, it just sometimes feels a bit like, okay, it could possibly happen. If a person's got a history of wandering, fair enough. But to keep putting that in just as the person
On the
could
risk
into the
assessment.
road.
Let me tell you something. This is really funny. One time, okay, my dolls, it was put into place, what, 2 years ago? 2 years ago? No, I'm not. Yeah, 2 years ago. And it ended like in October last year because I turned 18. On my dolls, it was put in 2 years ago. 3 years ago, one time, one time, I opened the door of a moving car. 2 years later, that was the one of the first things on my dolls. It happened once 2 years ago. What you
Mm,
I feel like if you're going to apply a risk to someone continuously, and also people don't understand, I feel like even people don't understand that like risk is not like a constant thing. It's like assessed right there and then. Like even people with like I don't know, like dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, they can be, articulate at times. They can be aware where they are. And right there and then they're not at risk of attacking someone.
yeah, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, and I guess like what you was alluding to, it's the fact that your life is under a microscope, isn't it? Everything's recorded, nothing's forgotten, and you have the that overarching kind of power wielded over you, as that's kind of what you were saying before, like sometimes it's used as a weapon.
Yeah.
It's not actually used to liberate you, which is why you're very tempted to rebel against it, because it's not always used appropriately. It's
Yeah.
not always um used in a way that's going to nurture you to be independent. It's kind of like almost like a stick to beat you with. you're on this dole, so you do as we say, you do what we say when we say it. And you're like, actually, I do have a mind, I do have emotions, I do have desires. There's ways I need to process things that you might understand, but their role is to understand. It is to mold and be flexible. That's what I would argue. You
Mm,
shouldn't be in a place with old, just adults. You should be in a place that's age appropriate.
mm. And I feel like the one thing that people forget is I feel like a lot of people with trauma are seen as intelligent or
Mm.
articulate or whatever they're gonna put it as because I feel like often that people with trauma are underestimated. And then when they do things that other people their age do, is oh my god, that you can do this, you can do that. But I feel like they forget that the people that they're working with or the people that they're looking after is a child. I feel like you're turning this child into an adult, and this child didn't like if you're in care, this child did not have a chance for childhood, and then you brought them in, and that's one of the main things that you're trying to give back to them, their childhood. And when you like not and don't have people that their own age around them or opportunities to interact with people their own age, it does raise other issues because they will often feel quite isolated. And it's I feel like people the one thing I've got to say is like I've been to a psychiatric ward several times, under section and voluntarily. Voluntarily funny. Anyway, and even though the urge to run away is there, if there's a chance you're gonna go take it. But like I feel like the risk is of running away is much less in there than in a care home or a home, your own personal home where there's dolls. Because for as a child, you like which adult walls do not have, but you have structure, you have routine, you go to education, you have groups. Like from 7 a.m. in the morning till 6 p.m., your day is scheduled. You have everything sorted out for you. You're like interacting with people your own age. You're doing each other's hair. You're doing art together. You're going to school together. You're having lunch and interacting. And these young people, they usually are not in school or education or employment, so they're not seeing people their own age, and they're thriving in this environment. They may be struggling, but they're thriving. And I feel like that says a lot about the education system and people getting excluded very quickly. And I feel like education, the teachers and schools do really what, they try their absolute best, but I feel like people often forget that education, once you take somebody out of education, which is as a young child or child at all, that's literally what your life is about. It's not about work. It's not about, oh no, I need to pay my rent. It's about school. School's your entire world. You see these people 5 times a week. You spend more time with them than your parents because you come back, you do have dinner, you go to bed, and that's your routine, and that's it. And once you take them out, that they're out there, and they will find care from anybody, and that's where a risk comes. They'll find care from either people online, like gangs, whatever it is, to fill that need. And I think once you take a child out of education, that's when things are going to start going wrong.
Yeah.
You,
It's tricky, isn't it? I think, yeah, we know from what research says that once people do become excluded from school, you know, they're more likely to get involved with other things. Having said that, you know, a lot of people still struggle with mainstream schooling environments that don't provide any flexibility for neurodiversity, learning in specific ways. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? And you know, the other side of things is that, you know, we are, as humans, supposed to thrive within our community, you know, within our tribe or whatever you want to call it. But again, you know, some people really struggle. You know, they might suffer from social anxiety, you know, bullying. You know, schools, as much as it is a place of structure and to thrive, it's a war zone for some people. It's a real struggle to be in those environments. So it's about getting the balance right. What do you think?
I agree. I feel like the balance is what is needed. It's like it's like PRN, right? Pro rata as and when needed. You don't just take it just because you feel like just, like, oh, might as well take one. I have like 28 left. It's like I feel like I'm getting distressed, I'm gonna take it. I feel like the dolls are like that. It's like it's gonna need to be used when it's as and when needed. I feel like, and also sometimes people are too quick to jump into adults as well.
Yeah.
But like like my local borough, they were really patient. They were really understanding because they gave me a good 2 to 3 years. And my risk, like I feel like risk is not like, that is people that says, oh, their risk is constantly high. It's not high all the time. If you're like, but there's gonna be a period of highs, and then there's gonna be a few weeks where nothing happens, and then it's gonna go psh. And yeah, I feel like a balance is needed. Because you can't just deprive someone. They're human. And they're gonna go insane. They will they will go insane if you just deprive them of everything. And then the life with dolls or without dolls, what life with so much restriction should never become a normality. And I can tell you from experience, once it becomes a normality, you do start going insane. You're like, what is this? You start getting more angry. Instead of getting emotional, sad and stuff like that first, you already go jump into anger because, like, usually, but you go into a much more intense anger. Where it's like, I will, and it will last for weeks at a time. Where everything is a problem. Every part of you, everybody around you is a problem. Your environment's a problem, and you do anything to destroy it. And you will have less understanding of other people, even less than before. And it's like I feel like without the balance, I feel like you that person is pretty much a walking dead person.
Mm, mm, yeah, yeah. And I guess the other thing is, you know, a year is a long time, isn't it?
Mm,
A year is a long time in anyone's life. And, you know, at least if you're convicted of a crime and you get 6 months, you know you're gonna do 3, you know, or maybe 2 if you good behavior. If you're an adult, it's a year. I mean, you can, you know, there are grounds to appeal, of course, but that's not a quick process, is it? It's not like you can say, well, I appeal and someone's going to hear your case tomorrow.
yeah. I feel
Um,
like in a psychiatric ward, if you appeal a suit as, think about appealing in a psychiatric ward is you know what? I was meant to be on section 3, but they didn't put me on a section 3 because they knew they couldn't let me out, whether I was voluntarily there or not, because I didn't have a place to live and I was a minor. So they kept me there voluntarily, but I'm technically on a section 3 there.
Mm,
No, like when I say technically, I mean like it's like that's the sort of conditions. I live there, I'm having treatment there, I'm having all the care there, and I can't appeal it. I can't go out because you know what? I couldn't even appeal it once or twice ever
but if
because
you were informal, you wouldn't have needed to appeal it. So I think there's a difference,
because
isn't there?
I couldn't go out regardless because I didn't have a place to live and I
Yeah,
couldn't just walk out or somebody come and pick me up and I walk out.
well,
It
then
was
you
great.
wasn't really voluntarily then, was you? You wasn't really there voluntarily. You were de facto detained. If you had tried to leave, regardless of whether you had somewhere to stay or not, accommodation could, in an ideal world, could have been arranged. If you decided, I no longer need to be here, I no longer want treatment, I would like to leave, and they didn't open the door for you, then you're right, you are kind of on a section 3, but not legal, not
No.
legal.
And it was like so frustrating is because it's like you're like no man's land. Like, okay, so I can't appeal this because I'm under no legal framework. I can't walk out the door because I don't have an accommodation. But I'm not in a section. I have my I have my I can take my liberty, but I don't have my liberty.
Mm,
And it's like each place, and then you go right back. It's like walking in a maze. You think you're going somewhere, but then you just hit a dead wall.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the system is, it is oppressive without a doubt. It is oppressive. Um,
I find
there
it.
are, go on, sorry.
No, no, go on. No, it's
No, I
fine.
was just going to say there obviously had been plans to overhaul the Mental Capacity Act and doles and replace it with liberty protection safeguards. There was also a plan to draft a new mental health bill. None of those things are priorities for the government at the moment. So
No, I feel like even I wouldn't call him a sir, but he got a title of sir. I got Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of Police. He he's was last September. He was like, "Oh, police are not going to be coming to mental health calls unless they're life and death." I'm like, but it is life and death. If somebody calls you, is it's best to be safe and sorry because it can quickly change to life and death. It's not like, oh, yeah, in 10 minutes it's going to turn into life and death situation. Can you come here but within 10 minutes? No, it could be any time. And I feel like
well,
even though it's like it's the NHS, the paramedics that are more suited, not fully suited, but more suited than the police. I feel like it should be a collaboration. They have mental health police though.
yeah, I
They've
mean,
got
it's interesting you bring this up because it's something I'm doing a lot of work on at the moment. Um, so essentially, what the police are saying is that we're spending so much more time on mental health than fighting crime.
yeah.
So what they've
God.
said, yeah, I know. So what they've said is that, you know, we are not always the best people
Mm,
to respond to those sort of situations. And in a sense, I think, yeah, if you're having some sort of difficulty and the police turn up, they're not mental health trained practitioners. They won't know what to say. They probably won't know what to do. All they can do and all they have the power to do is remove you from a public place and take you to either a health-based place of safety or A&E. So what they're saying is we're not always the best people. Under certain situations where there are risks, we will respond, but we actually think, maybe a paramedic or a mental health professional might be, or social care might be the more appropriate people. And that right care, right person model was implemented in the Metropolitan Police on the 1st of November. So it's been running. The police have seen a bit of a reduction, but yeah, it was initially designed to be more of a trauma-informed approach, because we know particularly Black and brown people are more likely to be restrained.
Arrested. Tell me about it.
Arrested, but also restrained, handcuffed, those sort of restrictive interventions. And if it's someone's first episode of treatment by the mental health system, it's not going to be positive, is it? So that's, essentially that's what's happened. That's what we're working with. And I think eventually we will see things balancing more on social health and social care than the police. However, at the moment, the police are the only people who have the power to take someone off the street and, make sure that they are under proper care and control.
And it doesn't make sense. It's like, and the thing is, the police, like, in public, they're the only people that can, 136 someone. And I'm like, okay, so if you're not going to respond and this person is in crisis and the people who look after them or are with them do not have the capacity to care for them at that very moment, and they lack capacity, and people don't call 909 if somebody's in their home and call the police and they're like, oh, they're mentally, it's when they're outside. And, there's train stations, there's all these different types of risks. And then you're like, okay, this person, and you know what? The police do respond quicker than ambulance. If a person is distressed, the ambulance, and you call the ambulance, they will take, on average, an hour and a half to respond. And you're like, okay, so this person is going to die, can die within an hour and a half, in whatever means possible. And then you can think, okay, then when members of public, people who are not trained, but the police are much better trained than, an average member of public, then okay, I know if somebody touches me, especially with my back and neck, my aggression is gonna go up, and they're gonna get aggressive, and then you're going to come, the police, in a time where somebody's being aggressive, but this all escalated because other members of the public, because of their moral compass, they're like, I can't just watch somebody going to try and kill themselves and live with myself if something happens. So they intervene, they're getting assaulted, somebody else sees and calls the police, and you're coming because somebody's getting assaulted, and that person's more likely to get arrested than receive the right help. And then if that person's distress calms down before they go to the police station, none of the mental health considerations will be taken into account. And there's quite a few people that have experienced that. Or if they're continuously distressed, they will be sectioned or taken to hospital because a custody sergeant won't allow them to come in and be in custody. And they say and one of the things that Mark Rowley did say is he said, we want to focus on helping victims of crime. And I was like, if he explained it differently, and I'm like, people who have mental health difficulties, most of the time they are victims of crime. Like crime that's been happening for years. I don't know. maybe it's a wild theory, but I'm like, is it me or does it? Yeah, like,
Yeah, maybe that is the link then. If they're spending less time going out and assisting people, should we say, with mental health difficulties, they're doing less of that, then maybe they will have more time to safeguard and protect vulnerable people.
hmm,
And they're not saying categorically, no, we're never going to do this work. What they're trying to do is foster partnerships so that they're not always the default, you know, they're not always the so and so is here, can you come? Um, you know, so it's it's going to be a work in progress. I'm sure there's going to be some slips and trips along the way. But I see it as a move in the right direction, particularly if we have a shift in legislation that allows for maybe other professionals to have a little bit of power to be able to
hmm.
do certain things that the police do now. Potentially, that's again might be a wild theory, but potentially if, for example, paramedics or other qualified mental health professionals were able to go out, and we've seen models. So in Milton Keynes, they have mental health triage that go out with the police. So the first person someone sees isn't a police officer, it could be a qualified nurse or a qualified social worker, and they'll get to talk to them. The police might be in the background, but they'll
Yeah.
speak to them first. And what that's actually doing is it's reducing input from the police. So it's thinking about other ways that other services can support people, because we know the police they're taxiing people, really and truly, aren't they? They can restrain people if needed. They might be able to de-escalate situations, but what we need is a trauma-informed response to someone who might be in a crisis or might be suicidal.
You know what I think? I feel like this step that Mount Rowley did is two steps forward, one step back. I'm like, you should have put the like if you're gonna say we're not responding, then you need to give an adequate replacement. And I don't know if that's gonna be an additional member who like force to join, the ambulance, police, the coast guards and firefighters, because this either healthcare needs to get more funding, so there's paramedics that can go out in timely manners, power to be like, police can have power, but also somebody else to have power to detain someone under the Mental Health Act. Because how are we saying, we're right in saying this, but how are we saying that the police are not suited to respond, but they're the only one that have the power to section someone in public? So how can they make the statement and then have the only, make it make sense? Because only half of it makes sense. Like, you need to put something else in place. Like, for example, it's like, you're turn 18. I'm gonna say my situation where I didn't have a therapy. My therapy stopped a week before I turned 18, but I was seeing a child psychiatrist every 2 weeks, and I was continuing to see her even past 18 because I haven't been accepted by any of the people yet. I mean, services, and she saw me for a month after I turned 18. It's like, okay, you turn 18, but I haven't put anything in place then, but I'm not just going to leave you. It feels like they pretty much abandoned the situation, be like, okay, respond if needed, but this is not our problem anymore. Then
Mm.
whose problem is it? What are you going to do now? What things are you going to put into place? Because but then people, even then, even if you call 999 and go through to, the paramedic side, police are definitely going to respond quicker.
Mm.
And somebody being aggressive, they're going to come anyway because it's like, people are in danger of harm and they're just going to deal with it. And then you're going to wait for a paramedic to turn up. Doesn't make sense. Unless a police officer is going to take you in their police car or van to hospital themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was initially due to start in August, and there was pushback to say, look, we're not ready. We need other things in place. And I think this is going to continue to, be a factor.
Mm.
We need people to have other powers potentially. We need funding to bolster, what we have. But again, police aren't saying no, they're just saying under certain circumstances, we're not the ones to call. So
Mm.
watch this space.
Yeah, and it's like, then who is right to respond? And who's going to respond in a timely manner?
Yeah.
And now, if you're if you call 999 and you get through to a paramedic, I mean, not paramedic, 999 call handler, they do a triage. And they'll be like, okay, a mental health person's gonna, clinician is gonna call you, and they do a triage, and they'll be like, okay, we're gonna send paramedics out. Just stay alive for the next 3 hours. Be like, I'm suicidal. I'm not like suicidal and patient. I'm suicidal.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about you. Usually, somebody who's caring or is around that will call 999. The person that is distressed, they're going to do whatever they want. If they want to die, they will go to any means. But like, I know I would do anything in my power to do what I want to do. If that means that I'm going to die, I will do anything. So how is a half an hour call? Somebody's triaged me, and then an hour and a half for them to come. I feel like we just need another paramedic service, but just mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see your point of view, but I suppose the other side to think about is if you are calling, you are in need or you're seeking something,
Mm,
and if you had made a decision to end your life, you wouldn't be calling anyone. You would just do it, wouldn't you?
mm,
People don't feel suicidal, um, obviously because they're happy. They're in some sort of pain, they're in some sort of discomfort, and they want to be relieved from that. They don't all want to die. They want relief. They don't want to feel how they feel anymore. And so they
mm,
seek help because they don't know what else to do.
mm,
So I'm not going to say the system's ideal. The system is stretched. We've got doctors going on strike, we've got recruitment issues. Um, it's difficult. It's really, really tricky. And I think, there are other helping services that people can access either online. They can call Samaritans. If they call the single point of access, someone will generally talk to them and give them advice.
mm,
There's even residential places, somewhere called like the listening place, and another place people can go and they feel suicidal. Not ideal, not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. Um, but it's what we have at the moment.
mm. What do you think needs to happen from a professional perspective? What do you think needs to be put into place to respond to people in distress, at least adequately?
Ah, good question. Um, so I'm doing a course at the moment called Open Dialogue, and its roots are in family therapy. And the basis behind an open dialogical approach is listening to the person and their network. So, for example, if you are experiencing mental distress, myself and another therapist would meet you and your family, and we'd talk through the problem. You would be able to express how you felt. Your network doesn't necessarily have to be immediate family. Your network is whoever you choose to be in your network. It could be a carer, it could be a cousin, it could be a friend. We sit down and we talk through what the dynamics are. But more importantly, we listen. We ask questions, we listen. Me and my other colleague, we would reflect on what we've heard, we'd come back to you. There's no power. You are the master of your own destiny in that respect. We're not, as professionals, going to wag our finger and say, don't cut yourself, don't self-harm, don't, do all these risky behaviors. We're being invited to understand your context, to understand your narrative. And that's how we're responding. So it's an approach that started in Iceland, Helsinki. And there's a study going on at the moment that should be published this year, because there are a few pilot sites in the UK that have been practicing an open dialogue approach. And I feel quite excited about it because it's, in certain areas, it's reduced the amount of people needing inpatient treatment. It's reduced the amount of people needing medication. It's reduced the amount of people that have needed to be under services, and people have just been able to get better and get on with their lives. So it's an approach that I'm learning more about, but I feel like actually maybe we do just need to listen, instead of like using this power over people to manipulate them to conform. Let's actually listen to what they want. Let's listen to how they're feeling, and let's try and work on solutions together. So it's kind of that shared power. So that's something I'm learning more about. I think it's got potential to change how we approach mental health issues. But I think that the thing is, one size doesn't fit all. It's really finding what will work for people. And we can only find that out by engaging, by talking, by listening, by learning. And sometimes we're not good at that because we have our own agendas as professionals, as the system. We've got a waiting list. We've got, I've got maybe 30 other people on my caseload. There's so many different pressures that I think sometimes we do really struggle to just stop, listen, learn. So that's my take on things currently.
Lovely. Do you see any practices in other boroughs? I mean, not other boroughs, other parts of the country or internationally that we may benefit from seeing? Let me rephrase that. Is there any concepts that other people do, either in different parts of our country or in the different parts of the world, that we might be, which we might benefit from doing?
It's a difficult question to answer, because I was born here, and I've only practiced here. Obviously I do a lot of reading and research, but I often reflect on the differences between societies.
Hmm.
So, for example, we have those disparities in mental health for people of color in the mental health system. If you go to the Caribbean or places in Africa, you don't see those disparities because those people aren't minorities. It's so the dynamics and societal and even familial structures are so different. They really are. I mean, my knowledge around substance use, I would say, is greater. So, for example, in places in America, in certain places in Europe, they've decriminalized cannabis use. In Portugal, instead of being punitive around substance use, they've looked at it more from a public health perspective. So in Portugal, they had really high amounts of HIV, which was sort of through drug use, so sharing needles and stuff. And so they kind of thought, well, we need to do something about this. And what they did was they approached it in more of a public health way. So they're sort of sending people to prison. They would say, look, would you like treatment instead? People were getting treated. The whole, there was a shift in thinking, which meant that people were more readily able to get help, come off drugs, and the rates of infection decreased. So it's that shift in perspective. And obviously, I know in mental health, we have campaigns, the Royals kind of really got behind mental health and destigmatization. But I really think that is key to things changing. We need to normalize not being happy all the time. It's impossible. It's impossible to feel happy all the time. So, until we've kind of shift that a little bit in society and become a bit more accepting, I think it's going to be difficult for us to adopt a different approach. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So yeah, I don't have any comparators. Australia, Canada, America, they do produce some great research. But again, those countries, not hugely dissimilar, but very different demographic, very different healthcare systems. So yeah, all I can talk about really is what's come out of Iceland, which is the open dialogue approach for mental health. We'll see.
We'll see if it works. How does drug use impact mental health and vice versa?
Right. So obviously, someone who is feeling depressed, for example, might take a substance, and that substance might make them feel happy or stimulated or energetic or pain-free. So sometimes people self-medicate. So they might be feeling, they might have a certain mindset or a mental state, and they'll take a substance to make them feel better. But then what sometimes happen is they become dependent then on that substance to keep making them feel better, and it will become an issue. Someone might not have an issue with their mental health, but start taking a substance for recreational use, for example, you know, everyone's drinking or going to the pub or clubs or whatever, they start drinking. And the substances, be it alcohol or any other illicit substance, is mind altering. So it will alter people's perceptions, their mind, their cognition. And sometimes it can cause short or long-term mental illness. So some people can smoke cannabis all day, every day. Other people will become psychotic when they smoke cannabis. You know, similarly with you know, crack cocaine, if people are taking it round the clock for 4 to 5 days, not sleeping, they're likely to become mentally unwell because they're not giving their mind a break. They're not sleeping, and you know, it's not going to bode well. Alcohol is a depressant drug, so it's going to slow everything down. Again, if people are drinking over long periods of time, when they stop, they're likely to feel depressed, they're likely to feel anxious. So those are the sort of two combinations. And obviously you've got people who it's hard to separate what come first or how they interact, because the person might just always be under the influence. So how do you know what's the alcohol, what's the actual mental health? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's complicated is what I'm saying, but they
Yeah.
both bounce off each other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to strip back one from the other.
So I have a question. You know, when somebody's under the influence of either alcohol, drugs, or whatever it may be, how many times are you allowed to delay the assessment? Is it as many times within the 36-hour period? No, with 24-hour period with additional 12 hours adjusting.
Mm. So what the law says is that you have 24 hours, but if it's not practicable to assess someone within those 24 hours, you can extend it for another 12. But it needs to be signed off by a medical practitioner. What the code of practice says is that, you know, you should wait. You know, least restrictive option is to wait. Often, you know, within 24 hours, if someone's had a sleep, maybe had something to eat, had some fluids, sometimes, you know, the intoxicated state has passed and the person's able to sort of verbalize and say, well, you know, XYZ happened. If they are still under the influence or intoxicated and there are still concerns, then sometimes you know you're kind of in a position where you might just have to assess based on the information you have. But the 24 hours can be extended to 36.
So how can some people can do drugs and not get mentally unwell? However, some people they even they do it once or even twice and then they get mentally unwell. Is
Mm.
there is there an like a known reason for that?
So there's some theories around and research. So what it talks about is that if you've got a predisposition to mental illness, so for example, if my mother or father had schizophrenia, for example, then genetically that might predispose me to developing it. And if I use substances, that again might increase my risks. So there's that. There's also something around vulnerability factors, such as people who tend to you know, live in social housing, maybe not have access to money or good jobs, nice environments, more susceptible to suffering from a mental illness, the living conditions. So it's the social factors. So those are some of the reasons. And the other reasons, I guess, are just physiological, you know, the chemistry in the brain, people's situations. And it's not to say that if you're rich and you live in a manor house, you're not susceptible to mental health problems, because it cuts across society. But those are just the factors that have kind of been explored as being relevant to why some people can and some people can't.
Um, so when someone is under the no, oh my gosh, when someone is mentally unwell, how does it go to the point where, okay, this person, mm, because I've noticed, okay, I noticed a pattern is people who are, you know, either have melanin or are from an ethnic minority, they're more likely to end up in the like criminal justice route of, ending up getting arrested. People are less tolerant of the behavior. And one of the, you know, one of the like, impact of like trauma is, you're more likely to be much more reactive physically, emotionally. You're more likely to be aggressive. But like, how why do people get thrown out of hospitals? Not thrown out, like, yeah, pretty much thrown out of hospitals when they're suffering from mental health, but there's also a physical side of it.
So what do you mean by physical side of it?
Where they become physically aggressive.
Where they've been arrested, do you mean?
No, no, no. When they've been in a ward or something like that, they get
Yeah.
distressed and they become physically aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, we're gonna them getting arrested is much more better than them staying there. How do you people come to that conclusion?
Well, I guess it's, so again, it's a tricky one. If someone's become aggressive in the context of their mental illness, and that could be them responding to hallucinations, for example, then I think those issues should be addressed within the mental health system, and often are. You know, people are put into seclusion, you know, they're restrained. Unfortunately, they're injected against their will to kind of bring down
Did you say
the
rejected?
excitement. Injected, yeah.
Oh, into yeah.
Injected, yeah. So you know, that kind of tends to calm people down and alleviate the tension and distress.
Mm.
However, you do get incidences where, you know, there's patient on patient violence, sexual violence as well,
Mm.
patient on staff violence, and sometimes it's because someone's unwell, sometimes it's not. And if it's not, it's a crime. So, you know, no one goes to work to be uh, abused and assaulted. So I think there is, you know, and these are policies that are within my trust and within many other trusts. There are policies around how you deal with aggression and violence on wards. Again, it's contextual. I think what you were alluding to earlier is the fact that, there is systemic racism and discrimination within our society that perpetuates all institutions, including, social care, the prison court system, housing, education, healthcare, employment. It's across society. So, and you're right, if you're already on the back foot, sometimes your responses might be aggressive and might escalate situations. And I'm not condoning that at all. But in terms of how it's dealt with, it's case by case, it's context, it's contextual. And yeah, people are often they're often harshly punished for things. I mean, I can think about a situation that I was assessing a young person who did become psychotic and assaulted someone, and they were in hospital and they were getting better, but their mum called me and said, oh, they're looking at 6 years in prison. And I was like, well, they weren't well at the time. It wasn't a malicious act of violence. It was in the context of them experiencing a psychotic episode. And I said, you need to get mental health services to write a report on, what's been going on. This needs to be considered. But some people don't have access to that information because they clearly weren't being advised by their treating team at that time. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Looking back on our conversation, what's the most important takeaway or message you want our audience to remember?
I think the complexities, you've shared a lot about your experiences, which have really enlightened me. So thank you.
Okay.
But I think we've also kind of grappled with the complexities of life generally. But also the systemic, that the system isn't ideal either. Societal views impact the way in which we treat people. It's been really good. It's been really good to
All those questions that I sent you?
I didn't
We've
read the questions you sent me.
Oh, that's fine because we didn't go through any of them. I was like, even like we were in the first part, and I was like, you know what? Get about the script. Get about it. We really naturally flow because some people like guidance.
Okay.
We just went off it, and I was like, oh, this is good.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I've really enjoyed our discussions. Yeah. And obviously, for me, getting to hear from the other side of the fence, someone on the receiving end, is always humbling. I'm up in my ivory tower, sort of, not making decisions, but always thinking about keeping the people that use services at the heart of what I do, of what I want to represent. And it's really easy to forget. It's really easy to forget who's on the other side.
Are there any upcoming projects, events, or resources you'd like to share with the people listening?
No, not at the moment. I sort of feel like, the government's in flux. It's all a little bit heavy at the moment, isn't it? Cost of living
That's one way to put it.
crisis, floods, global warming. social care is kind of like way down on the list of priorities. We're just all cash strapped at the minute.
Mm.
I want to try and think about something like really positive to say. Um, I just can't at the moment. Can't.
That's fine.
Yeah, no. I think people with the passion that you have make a difference. We need to hear much more um, from people with lived experience. And actually, what I will say is there is a huge movement on at the moment around care leavers and people with lived experience. And I think that's really positive because you have a seat at the table and you deserve to be there and you deserve to be heard and considered. So I think that's something I've really seen as a positive um over the last few months. I've seen billboards saying care leavers needed, and I've been like, what? Then I've looked up and I'm like, oh right, yeah. And it's even come up in my trust. Yeah, we want to get care leavers, we want apprenticeship care leavers, we want people with lived experience. So I think that's a real positive. We've got peer support workers that are employed for their experience. And I've worked with a peer support worker. I actually interviewed them and, recruited them and worked alongside them. And I just think they bring so much richness to the therapeutic space that I can't give. Because I'm sort of a textbook person. That person has walked the walk.
Mm.
So that's what I can say. I've seen that this has this movement has been really beneficial. And now we can't we can't move forward with projects unless we have the voice of someone with experience to give a view. I don't see many people that look like us. That's something I would like to change. Um, I am involved in different things, and I'd love to call on you again, maybe to get involved in a conference or connect you with decision makers, because you need to be in those rooms, you need to be giving your view, you need to be making people understand what it's actually like.
Oh, thank you. I would love to. Oh, sorry, I just find these things really uncomfortable. I'm so sorry. Um, what is the one thing that you're grateful for today?
Me, I'm grateful for life. I'm living in 2024. My exercise this morning, I'm feeling good. I'm going to have some acupuncture in a few hours. I've got a schedule of self-care. I've committed to having a massage every month. I've got a job that I love. Um, really enjoyed our podcast and like podcasts generally. Life's good. Yeah, I feel, at times I feel I don't have power, but I was able to, yesterday, I had a win yesterday. I asked for a favor and it was granted. And then someone else called and asked me for a favor and I paid it forward. And that felt like a really good thing to do. So yeah.
That sounds absolutely lovely. I've never thought about favors as something like paying forward. That- That's a really like cool thought. I just want to say a big thank you for joining us on our podcast. It's been absolutely amazing. And I feel like a lot of people will enjoy listening to this podcast. It was very informative. It was it felt like you're just having a conversation with a friend. And I hope that people listening to it feel the exact same way. Thank you so much for coming on. It was, what, it was amazing. I got to say, it was amazing. And yeah, thank you,
Thank
everybody. Yeah, do you want to say something?
you.
Um, thank you for everybody listening in, and until next time. But until then, stay iconic.